Ramogi Huma was a linebacker at UCLA from 1995 to 1999. When he came to the school, he thought he had come to terms with the fact that his primary job was to play football. When registering for classes, his counselor would advise him to take easy classes that would allow him to balance his hectic football schedule. Ramogi reluctantly agreed. However, his most pressing problem were the limits placed on his income. For food, Ramogi was only allowed to use the student dining card, which had been preloaded with a specific amount as a part of his scholarship. As a linebacker, he had ate 5 to 6 meals a day back home, but at school he could only swipe 2 to 3 times a day. Ramogi was hungry all the time and lost 10 pounds in his first year. One day, Ramogi and his teammates were told that one of the best players and All-American from a low-income household had been suspended for accepting groceries donated to him by a stranger. Ramogi believed this and many other rules for the players were unfair, so he started a campus organization to campaign for college athletes' rights. This organization would eventually become the National College Players Association, or NCPA. The reason Ramogi's teammate was punished and Ramogi wasn't allowed to make or accept extra money as a UCLA football player is due to rules from an organization called the National Collegiate Athletic Association, or NCAA. The NCAA is a nonprofit organization that regulates student athletics. It was formed in 1905 in response to the emergence of different sports teams on college campuses, particularly football teams, that were operating without uniform standards. In 1905, at least 150 students were injured and 18 students were killed while playing college football. This prompted the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, to organize a meeting amongst colleges to create the regulating body. From its inception, the NCAA insisted on enforcing the concept of amateurism, or the idea that players on college teams should play purely out of enjoyment and the potential to develop physical, moral, and/or social skills. Amateurism came from the culture at schools like Harvard and Yale, some of the oldest schools in the country, where college athletics first began. Students at these schools, often from wealthy families, played sports for leisure and status reasons, never expecting a scholarship or compensation in return. The NCAA banned any form of payment to amateur athletes, including financial aid or scholarships. In 1948, the NCAA instituted a sanity code, which allows schools to provide payment to cover tuition and fees, but no money towards room and board. Schools were also prohibited from giving financial aid to athletes that was not available to other students. Also, in order to qualify for financial aid of any kind, an athlete was required to demonstrate financial need and meet the school's admission requirements. In 1951, the head authority of the NCAA, Walter Byers, introduced the term student athlete to the lexicon in order to place emphasis on the academic portion of an athlete's time in college. As time went on, the tilt towards the athlete portion of the student athlete label would become more and more pronounced. During the 1950s, racial segregation meant that most Black students could only attend historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. An unintended result of this injustice was that HBCUs were able to sustain themselves financially from the attendance of Black students from all socioeconomic backgrounds, even though they were still underfunded in comparison to predominantly white institutions, PWIs. As the 1900s moved forward, two things began happening simultaneously. The Black American Civil Rights Movement brought an end to school segregation, and college sports became more and more profitable. Television provided a way for people to enjoy live sports without attending the games physically. The NCAA tried to restrict the ability of schools to enter into contracts with cable networks. However, in 1984, the Supreme Court ruled that such restrictions were illegal. This ruling allowed individual schools to enter into agreements with networks for the right to show live games. In 2022, for example, the Big Ten Conference announced a 7-year agreement with TV networks and streaming platforms that is worth an estimated $7 billion. But what about the players? Out of 1,093,234 high school football players in the United States, 6.5% or 71,060 of those high school players will play in college. From there, 1.2% or around 853 of the college-level players will get drafted to the NFL. The minimum requirements for Division I schools is a 2.3 GPA and a 980 SAT score or a 75 ACT score. However, at many colleges, special exception policies allow for students to be admitted even without meeting these already low requirements. The NCAA also tracks metrics like the Academic Progress Rate, APR, and the Graduation Success Rate, GSR, to monitor whether athletes are academically successful from year to year and are able to graduate with degrees. To calculate an APR for a school, each player who receives athletically related financial aid gets 1 point for staying in school and 1 point for remaining academically eligible. Then a team's actual points are divided by its total possible points and multiplied by 1,000. The 5 schools with the top APRs in 2022 are Clemson University, the University of Mississippi, the University of Alabama, Northwestern University, and the United States Air Force Academy. The GSR is determined by tracking first-time freshmen who are full-time students and whether they graduate in 6 years at the same institution. It doesn't count students in good standing who transfer to a different school. The GSR for those 5 schools for freshmen who entered in 2015 are 92% for Clemson University, 82% for the University of Mississippi, 89% for the University of Alabama, 97% for Northwestern University, and 93% for the United States Air Force Academy. You will see numbers like these at many of the most popular schools with the most successful football programs. They seem to indicate that the athletes are doing well academically and graduating. However, several scandals reveal how this picture is painted. In the 1980s, University of Georgia English teacher Jan Kemp accused the school of breaking NCAA and school rules to give passing grades to UGA football players so that they could play in the Sugar Bowl. When she was fired for her complaints, she successfully sued the school. Her lawsuit revealed a culture of academic fraud, and the UGA president resigned. In 2006, Florida State was penalized by the NCAA when it was discovered that athletes were taking online classes where they would receive test answers before they took exams and coursework was being completed on their behalf. In 2014, an 18-year athletic scandal was uncovered at the University of North Carolina. During this time, at least 3,100 students, most of them football players, took so-called paper classes. These classes did not require attendance and only asked students to turn in 1 paper at the end of the semester. In practice, the same papers were shared among students over several years, requiring them merely to change their name on the essay before turning it in. The classes were apparently created out of sympathy by an assistant in the African American Studies Department. Coaches and school officials sanctioned the use of these classes to keep players eligible. The press caught wind of the corruption from university learning specialist Mary Willingham. She had participated in the paper classes scandal and discussed trying to help players remain eligible when many of them could barely read. These scandals are just a few of many. It's an open secret that strategies, some technically allowed and some prohibited, are used to keep athletes eligible so that they can continue to play. Meanwhile, the NCAA and the universities rake in the cash. The NCAA made $1.15 billion in 2021. Flagship schools like the University of Georgia and the University of Alabama make over $100 million per year from their football programs. These 2 factors, the deprioritization of academics and the large sums of money being made by school teams, mean one thing. The players on these teams are not student athletes at all, but professional athletic entertainers being paid a fraction of what they are actually owed. For the 99% of players who will not make it to the league, they find themselves trapped in a cycle created by the dishonest student-athlete culture. Some get injured, lose their scholarships, and are faced with the challenge of finding other ways to fund their education. Some drop out and end up with no degree. Most graduate, but with a degree in an education that is woefully inadequate to gain a job which makes a living wage. Thankfully, in 2021, the Supreme Court ruled that the NCAA prohibition on non-cash education-related benefits for college athletes violates federal antitrust law. This legalized the ability for all athletes to make money from their own name, image, and likeness. Many legal observers feel that the case also paved the way for athletes to be classified as workers, finally be able to demand a portion of the revenues made by school football programs. Ramogi Huma and other advocates are certainly working towards this goal. In his concurring opinion in the Supreme Court case, Justice Brett Kavanaugh states bluntly, "The bottom line is that the NCAA and its member colleges are suppressing the pay of student athletes who collectively generate billions of dollars in revenues for colleges every year. Those enormous sums of money flow to seemingly everyone except the student athletes. College presidents, athletic directors, coaches, conference commissioners, and the NCAA executives take 6- and 7-figure salaries. Colleges build lavish new facilities, but the student athletes who generate the revenues, many of whom are African American and from lower income backgrounds, end up with little or nothing." The call for more Black athletes to attend HBCUs is well-intentioned, but must be paired with demands to make changes to how college athletics operate overall. We can understand how frustrating it is for HBCUs to watch as PWIs rake in millions from the labor of a predominantly Black athletic team while they struggle with low budgets and crumbling facilities. The irony of the situation is that these athletes are the students that these PWIs refused to admit decades ago and would still refuse to admit today if it were not for their athletic ability. However, HBCUs are not entitled to the free labor of Black players any more than white institutions. Deion Sanders' departure may feel like a lost opportunity, but his time at Jackson State shed light on internal areas of improvement. Even if changes to player compensation occur and Black players select HBCUs exclusively, there will also need to be a movement to hire media specialists, financial experts, and other people who can properly negotiate contracts and partnerships to ensure the greatest revenues for everyone involved. Decades of institutional neglect, underfunding, and Black flight means that it's unlikely one person could have created sustainable change. If the goal of our conversations is to discuss ways to uplift the Black community as a whole, we must see the players as victims of an unfair exploitative scheme. We should fight for solutions that create sustainable funding for HBCUs while also ensuring that players receive the pay they have earned.
Be taking my talents to.
Go ahead. Kevin, pick your hat. Where are you going to college?
Hey, put it on me. Hey, I'll be taking my talents. Play with prime time.
Okay. Headed to Jackson State.